Imagine you are 84 years old. You have lived in the same house for over 50 years. You know every creak in the floor, every shadow on the ceiling, every sound the neighborhood makes at night. You have a church you attend every Sunday. You have friends who call to check on you. You have children who love you. You have a life that is quiet and full and good. Now imagine that on an ordinary Friday night, someone drops you off at your front door. You walk through your garage. The door comes down behind you. You go inside. You take off your shoes. Maybe you sit in your favorite chair for a little while. Maybe you pour yourself a glass of water in the kitchen. Maybe you look at your phone, at a text from one of your children, and you think about calling back but decide to wait until morning because it is already late and you have church tomorrow and you want to get enough sleep. You put your phone down on the counter. You go to your room. You stand at your nightstand. You look at your medication. You think, I will take it in the morning. I always do. You get into bed. You close your eyes. And you are never seen again. No forced entry, no broken window, no alarm that screams into the night, no dog that barks at shadows, no neighbor who stirs from sleep, nothing disturbed, nothing knocked over, nothing out of place except for one thing. You are gone. That is not the opening of a novel. That is not a scene from a crime drama on a streaming platform. That is what happened to a real woman in a real house in a real neighborhood in Tucson, Arizona. A woman named Nancy Guthrie, and what was done to take her, the planning, the precision, the absolute cold calculation behind every single step of it, is something that the FBI itself described as a more sophisticated type of criminal activity than anything they expected to find in a case like this. This is the story that 23,000 people have called in tips about. Sir, this is the case that 50,000 leads have not been able to crack. This is the disappearance that a journalist with 36 years of experience risked her entire reputation to report on. And this is the silence, 30 days of it, thick and suffocating and deliberate, that has haunted every single person who has followed this case from the very beginning. Stay right here, do not move, because by the time this narration is over, you are going to understand not just what happened to Nancy Guthrie, but why this case is unlike almost anything investigators have seen before, what the evidence actually tells us, what it refuses to tell us, and why the most important question in this entire investigation is one that almost no one on mainstream television has been willing to ask out loud. If you are watching this and you are not yet a subscriber to the Untold Cold Case, head to hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications. This channel exists for one reason only, to make sure that the cases that matter never get buried under the noise. When this case breaks, and it will break, you are going to want to be here. So subscribe now, join this community, and then don't go anywhere. Because this is where it starts. There is something about cases involving elderly victims that should stop all of us in our tracks before we go a single step further into the details. It is easy in the world of true crime to become so focused on the mechanics of what happened, the timeline, the evidence, the suspects, the investigation, that you lose sight of the human being at the center of it. So before we go into the details of this case, I want you to hold on to this one fact and carry it with you through everything else that follows. Nancy Guthrie was somebody's mother. She was somebody's grandmother. She was the woman who showed up to the same church pew every single Sunday for years and years and years, until that pew became hers in the minds of everyone who sat near it. She was the woman whose presence was so reliable, so consistent, so faithful, that the moment she wasn't there, the people who loved her felt it before they even understood what they were feeling. She was not a case number. She was not a statistic. She was a woman who had built a life over 84 years, and she was taken from it by someone who planned that taking carefully and executed it with a precision that tells us clearly and unmistakably that whoever did this had thought deeply about the fact that they were targeting a specific human being, not just a house, not just an opportunity, her, Nancy, by name, by schedule, by habit, by every vulnerability that comes with being 84 years old and living alone. That is the weight of this case. And I need you to feel it, not just understand it, as we walk through everything that happened. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. She was not a celebrity. She was not a public figure. She was not someone whose name had ever appeared in a headline before the first day of February 2026. She was a woman who had built a quiet, devoted, deeply rooted life in Tucson, Arizona, and had lived that life in the same home for more than 50 years. Think about what 50 years in one house means. 50 years of watching the same trees grow in the front yard? 50 years of knowing which neighbor puts their trash out on which morning? 50 years of the same church, the same pew, the same women sitting beside you every Sunday, praying beside you, watching your children grow up, as you watching your grandchildren come into the world, 50 years of a life that is fully, completely, unmistakably yours. Nancy had all of that. She had friends who were not just friends, but family in every way that matters. Women in their 70s and 80s who had stood beside her through decades of ordinary and extraordinary life. She had children who loved her. She had grandchildren. She had a routine and she kept it faithfully, and everyone who knew her knew it. Because that is what 50 years of living in the same place produces. You become known. You become woven into the fabric of a community. People see you. People notice when you are there. People notice when you are not. On the night of Friday, January 31st, 2026, Nancy Guthrie was driven home by her son-in-law, a man named Tommaso Cion. The drive ended at 9:48 in the evening. He pulled into her driveway. She got out. She walked through the garage. So the garage door came down behind her. Tommaso Cion drove away, and in the entire recorded history of this case, that moment, 9:48 in the evening on January 31st, is the last confirmed moment that any living person saw Nancy Guthrie. Let that settle. Not the last moment anyone spoke to her, not the last moment anyone texted her or checked on her. The last confirmed moment that any living, breathing human being looked at her with their own eyes and watched her walk through a door. 9:48 in the evening. The garage door came down, and then nothing. Nothing confirmed, nothing seen. Nothing known for certain until a pacemaker app went dark in the early hours of the morning, until a family grew worried, until someone finally drove to her house almost 9 hours after her heart monitor had already gone silent, until they found blood at the front door, her blood, DNA confirmed. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. And this story cannot be rushed, because it is the details that matter here. It is the precision. It is the sequence of events that, when you lay them all out in order, paint a picture that investigators, journalists, and tens of thousands of ordinary people have been staring at for 30 straight days, trying to make sense of what they are seeing. So let us go back to the beginning. Not the beginning of the night Nancy disappeared, on the beginning of who Nancy Guthrie was and who showed up for her when she was gone. When Nancy vanished, her family did not hide. They did not go quiet. They did not retreat into private grief and wait for investigators to work. They came forward with everything they had, their voices, their tears, their money, their time, their public platforms, and the rawest, most unpolished versions of themselves that most people with that level of public exposure would never allow the world to see. Her daughter Annie appeared in front of cameras on day 5 of the search, day 5. 5 days after her mother had been taken from her home in the middle of the night, Annie Cion stood before the lens of a camera that she knew millions of people were watching through, and she did not compose herself, and she did not manage her image, and she did not give a carefully worded statement that had been reviewed by publicists or attorneys. She stood there with her hands shaking and her voice barely holding together, and she begged. She begged whoever had taken her mother to bring her back. She begged with everything she had. She did that standing next to her sister. She did that standing next to her brother. She did not do it standing next to her husband. Tommaso Cion was not there. The man who had driven Nancy home that night, the man who was the last confirmed person to see her alive, and the man who had pulled into that driveway and watched that garage door come down, he was not standing beside his wife when she begged for her mother's life in front of the nation. He wasn't there. Now Annie's sister Savannah, and this matters because of who Savannah is, kind of went further. Savannah Cion is not a private person. She is one of the most recognizable faces in American morning television. She is a woman that 60 million Americans trust to tell them the truth every single morning when they sit down at their kitchen table with a cup of coffee. She carries that trust. She has carried it for years, and when her mother was taken, she did not let that trust, or the platform it gave her, go to waste. She recorded video after video, not produced videos, not polished, lit, carefully framed content for a major network, raw videos. Videos filmed on a phone, in whatever room she was standing in, at whatever hour her grief became impossible to contain. Crying so hard that her sentences broke apart before she could finish them. crying in the way that a person cries when the thing that is happening to them is so large that their body simply cannot hold it without breaking open. She offered $1 million, not $1 million raised through a public fund, her own money. $1 million of her personal wealth, and offered to anyone who could bring information that helped bring her mother home. She looked into the camera and said the words that no child should ever have to say, that they still believed in a miracle, and then, in the same breath, that they also understood that Nancy might already be gone. She said both of those things. She held both of those truths at the same time, and she said them out loud, knowing that she might be eulogizing her own mother in real time, knowing that if her mother was already gone, then every word she spoke was a eulogy delivered to an audience of millions before the body had even been found. That is not performance. That is a person standing at the absolute edge of the worst experience of her life and refusing to let go, refusing to look away, refusing to do what would have been so much easier, to say nothing, to grieve privately, to let investigators work while she stayed behind closed doors. Sorry, she chose to be visible because her mother's life depended on visibility. Their brother Cameron flew across the country the moment he found out. He did not deliberate. He did not weigh his options. He dropped everything and he flew to Tucson. Nancy's church friends, women in their 70s and 80s, women who had sat beside her in the same pew for years and years, women whose own bodies were not built for desert heat and long hours on foot, organized search parties. And they walked grid lines through the Arizona desert in February, looking for a woman they had prayed with every Sunday of their adult lives. They did not wait to be organized. They did not wait for someone else to take the lead. They showed up because Nancy had shown up for them, week after week, year after year, decade after decade, and this was the least they could do in return. Think about what that means. Women in their 70s and 80s walking desert terrain in February heat, so calling out a name, looking at the ground beneath their feet, searching. Not because anyone asked them to, not because there was a reward they were hoping to collect, because Nancy was Nancy and she was theirs, and they were not going to sit in that pew on Sunday morning and pretend everything was normal when everything was not. And then there were the strangers, people who had never met Nancy Guthrie, people who had never been to Tucson, people with no connection to this family. I had no reason to show up except that they had heard about this case and something inside them refused to let them do nothing. They drove in from other states. They took time off work. They printed flyers and drove to gas stations and truck stops and taped those flyers to windows and walls. They walked miles of dirt roads under the Arizona sun looking for any sign at all, of an 84-year-old woman who had gone to bed in her own house and never woken up in it. Oh, the outpouring for Nancy Guthrie says something important about who she was, even to people who had never met her. You do not travel from another state and walk miles of desert road for someone you feel nothing about. You do it because something in the story of who she was, the 50 years in one house, the Sunday church, the friends who prayed beside her, the grandchildren, the life built slowly and faithfully over 8 decades, reached through the screen and made her real to you. I made her matter, made her absence feel personal even when she was a stranger. That is the kind of life that produces that kind of response. Every single person who loved Nancy showed up. Every person who had ever met her, prayed with her, known her, worked beside her. Strangers who felt her absence even though they had never known her presence. All of them came. And Tommaso Cion, the last person to see Nancy Guthrie alive, said nothing. Not one interview. Not one statement released through an attorney. Not one video recorded on a phone in a quiet room. Not one social media post. Not 5 words written on a piece of paper and handed to a reporter. We love her. Bring her home. 5 words. That is all the country needed. That is all 23,000 people who had already called in tips were waiting to hear. 5 words from the last man who saw her breathing would have been something. They would have been a signal, even the smallest one. That he was present, that he was part of this effort, that he was as desperate as the rest of this family to find her. He did not give them 5 words. He gave them nothing. And 30 days into this investigation, not the Tucson County Sheriff, not the Federal Bureau of Investigation, not a single person with a badge and a platform has stood in front of a camera and demanded to know why. Not one. That alone should make something shift inside of you. That alone should make you uncomfortable in a way that is difficult to name but impossible to ignore. But I need you to stay with me because what I am going to tell you next is the part that goes from uncomfortable to something else entirely, something that is going to change the way you see this case from this moment forward. Set whatever you are doing aside, sit up, and do not look away from this. There is a gap in this case, a 4-hour gap. And understanding that gap, what it means, what it implies, what it demands of anyone who is thinking carefully about this, is the key to understanding everything that follows. Tommaso Cion watched the garage door come down at 9:50 in the evening on January 31st. That is the end of the confirmed timeline of Nancy Guthrie's visible life. What came next, inside that house, in those quiet hours between 9:50 in the evening and what happened at 1:47 in the morning, we cannot know for certain. We know she was alive. We know the house was still. We know that nobody checked on her. We know that she was alone, 4 hours, from 9:50 in the evening to 1:47 in the morning. 4 hours where Nancy Guthrie was in that house by herself, completely unprotected, completely unreachable, and completely unaware of what was coming toward her, because something was coming. At 1:47 in the morning on February 1st, 2026, a figure appeared on the doorbell camera at Nancy Guthrie's home, a figure wearing a ski mask pulled tight over the face, black gloves on both hands, a backpack over one shoulder, a person who moved with a kind of calm that investigators, experienced investigators, federal agents who have seen a great many things in the course of their careers, later said disturbed them. Because this person did not look like someone who was nervous, they did not look like someone who was operating on instinct, or adrenaline, or improvisation. They looked like someone who had been to this address before, someone who had already measured the distance from the street to the front door, someone who already knew, without looking, exactly what was waiting for them when they got there. They walked up to that front door without rushing, without glancing over their shoulder, without any of the tells that law enforcement is trained to look for in someone who knows they are doing something wrong and is afraid of being caught. They moved to the front door like they had an appointment, like they belonged there, like they had done this before or had rehearsed it so many times in their mind that the reality of it felt familiar. And then, before they touched the door handle, before they took a single step inside, they reached up. And they took the doorbell camera off the wall. Not knocked off, not fumbled with in the dark. Taken, deliberately, precisely, immediately. The very first action taken at that house on that morning was the removal of the device that was recording everything. This person knew that camera was there. They knew exactly where it was mounted on the wall. They knew the exact height of it, the exact reach required to remove it, and they removed it without hesitation. Then they went inside. 41 minutes. 41 minutes is not a long time in most contexts. It is shorter than most movies. It is about the length of a television drama episode. It is the time it takes to make a meal from a recipe you already know by heart. In most contexts, 41 minutes disappears before you notice it has passed. Inside Nancy Guthrie's house, in the darkness of early morning on February 1st, 41 minutes was enough time to do something methodical, something thorough, something that required either knowledge of the house's layout or a level of precision that made knowledge unnecessary, because every action had been so carefully planned in advance that the darkness didn't matter, and the unfamiliarity didn't matter, and the pressure of time didn't matter. This person moved through Nancy Guthrie's home from room to room. They did not stumble. They did not bump into furniture in the dark. And they did not search randomly or panic when they couldn't find what they were looking for. They moved with purpose. And the first thing they did in every room they entered, before anything else, was find the security camera and destroy it. Every single one. Every camera in that house was located and destroyed. This person knew where those cameras were, not guessed, not found by scanning the walls with a flashlight. Knew in advance before they stepped through the front door, where every camera in that house had been mounted. Then they found Nancy, and at one point, 41 minutes after they entered, they walked out of that house, and Nancy Guthrie was not there anymore. No forced entry had occurred. No window had been broken. No door had been kicked in. No alarm had been tripped. No neighbor had woken up from sleep to the sound of something wrong. No dog had barked. Nothing in the neighborhood had moved or reacted or noticed anything out of the ordinary. The house was as quiet on the outside as it had been before 1:47 in the morning. Except that Nancy was gone. At 2:28 in the morning, 41 minutes after the masked figure had left her home, the application connected to Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker received its last signal. The device that her family checked every day, the technology that tracked every single beat of an 84-year-old heart, the thing that had given her children and grandchildren a window into her continued safety and survival from wherever they were in the world, it went dark. Not low battery, not a connection glitch that would resolve itself in the morning. Dark, and the house stayed dark, and the neighborhood stayed still, and the hours kept moving. 3 in the morning, then 4, then 5, and then the pale blue light of an Arizona sunrise over the Catalina foothills. And not one person in the world knew that anything had happened to Nancy Guthrie. Because here is the truth of how vulnerable she was. Here is the terrible arithmetic of it. Nancy Guthrie attended church every single Sunday of her life without fail. Her friends knew this, her family knew this, her community knew this. It was not a secret or a private habit. It was a defining part of who she was, the kind of reliable, a faithful routine that anchors a person in the lives of the people around them. But on that Sunday morning, Nancy did not show up, and it was not until the women who had prayed beside her for years began to look at each other during the service, began to whisper to each other that something seemed wrong, began to feel the absence of a presence that was never absent. It was not until that morning, hours after a pacemaker had gone silent, or hours after a masked figure had carried an 84-year-old woman out of her own house, that the alarm was finally, slowly beginning to be raised. And it took until almost noon, over 9 hours after her heart monitor had transmitted its last signal, before someone finally drove to her house, before someone finally walked up to that front door and found what had been left behind. Blood. On the front doorstep. Her blood. Confirmed by DNA analysis. Her phone sitting on the kitchen counter. Her wallet untouched inside the house. Her purse still in its place. Not the belongings of a woman who had packed a bag or made a decision or chosen to go somewhere. And on the nightstand beside her bed, the same nightstand she had stood beside for 50 years, in the same bedroom she had slept in for 50 years, in the same house that bore 50 years of her life inside its walls, her medication. The pills that kept her heart beating, the pills that her doctors, and later an expert who spoke publicly about the case said gave her roughly 72 hours before her body would begin to fail without them. She left them there because she expected to be standing in front of that nightstand the next morning. She left them there because she planned to take them when she woke up. She left them there because she had no reason to believe that she would not wake up in that room. She never made it to morning. Nancy Guthrie did not leave her home voluntarily. She did not wander. She is 84 years old, but she is not a woman who wanders. She is a woman with a routine, a community, a family, a life built on 50 years of faithful presence in one place. She did not walk out that door on her own. She was taken, carried out of her own home, by someone. And the question that has driven this investigation from its very first hour is a question that cuts through every theory, every tip, every press conference, every statement from every official who has stood before a camera and tried to explain what they know and what they do not. Who was it? Not a stranger. That is the first thing investigators made clear when they began to speak publicly about what the evidence was showing them. A former agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, a person who has spent a career learning how criminal minds operate, looked at the details of this case and used specific language. This was not random. This was not opportunistic. This was, in the words of that former agent, a more sophisticated type of criminal activity than the kind that happens when someone chooses a house at random. Let us think about what random crime actually looks like, because the contrast matters. A crime of opportunity is defined by its improvisation. Someone walks down a street, sees an unlocked door or an open window, and in a moment of impulse acts on it. Their movements are reactive. They scan a room looking for valuables they could not have known were there. They are startled by sounds. They leave traces behind because they did not have time to plan how not to. They miss cameras because they did not know where to look. They trip alarms because they did not know the code. And they leave in a hurry, often empty-handed or close to it, because the whole thing was improvised from the first moment. None of that happened at Nancy Guthrie's home on the night of February 1st. Think about what sophistication requires in a case like this. It requires knowledge of the camera positions. Not general knowledge, the knowledge of which wall each camera was mounted on, at what height, in which room. The kind of knowledge that does not come from standing outside a house on the street, the kind of knowledge that comes from being inside the house, from walking those rooms, from looking at those walls with your own eyes, from having enough time and enough access to register every detail and carry it away with you. It requires knowledge of the schedule, not just that Nancy lived there, but that on Friday nights she came home from a particular activity and was dropped off at a particular time, that she would be alone inside that house from roughly 9:50 in the evening onward, that no one would come for her until the next day, and that even then the people who might come for her would not come until morning, not until church time, not until her absence from a Sunday service made something feel wrong enough to investigate. Someone knew all of that. Someone knew enough about Nancy Guthrie's life, her schedule, her home, her routines, her vulnerabilities, to construct a plan that had a 4-hour window built into it, that accounted for every camera, that anticipated every potential source of alarm, and that executed so cleanly that the neighborhood did not notice. The security systems did not record it, and nothing was left behind at the scene except blood and a silence so complete that it lasted 9 full hours before anyone even knew something had gone wrong. That is not a crime of opportunity. That is a crime of study. Someone studied Nancy Guthrie. Someone learned her life the way you learn a map before you travel somewhere, deliberately, systematically, with a specific destination already in mind. And the question that has been screaming through this investigation, the question that 23,000 tipsters have been building toward with every phone call and every email and every anonymous tip submitted to the FBI, is not just who did this. The question is, who told him? Who told the masked figure where the cameras were? Who told him she would be alone? Who told him the layout of each room before he set foot inside? Who told him that no one would come to check on her until the next morning, until church time, until late enough that 9 hours of silence could pass without anyone noticing? Or, and I need you to sit with this question because it is the one that changes the shape of everything, did he already know? Did he already know where those cameras were because he had stood in those rooms before? Did he already know that kitchen counter, that hallway, that bedroom, even that nightstand, not because someone described them to him, but because he had been there, had sat at that table, had walked through those rooms with the kind of casual familiarity that does not require a map because the territory is already a part of your memory? Did he already know Nancy Guthrie's schedule, not because he had been watching the house from outside, but because he was a part of the life that produced that schedule? If that question just reached inside your chest and grabbed something, if something shifted when you read it, that is the right response. That is your instincts working correctly, because a journalist with 36 years of experience, a woman who has never been described by anyone in this industry as reckless or irresponsible, asked the exact same question. She went on air with a credible first-hand source, and she pointed her reporting in the direction that question points. And what happened to her after she did that is the part of this story that demands its own chapter. Her name is Ashley Banfield, and before you hear what she reported and what happened to her next, you need to understand exactly who she is and what her record means. Ashley Banfield was not a weekend podcaster with a microphone and a theory. She was not a social media personality who built a following by reading Reddit threads about true crime. She is a woman who, on September 11th, 2001, stood in the streets of Lower Manhattan while the towers burned and fell and the air filled with ash and chaos and death, and she reported. She filed live. She stood in the rubble of Ground Zero while it was still hot, and she told the world what she was seeing with the kind of steadiness that is not performed. And that is the professional result of 36 years of training and experience, and standing in the hardest places on earth and refusing to look away from the truth of what she was witnessing. That is the person who, on February 4th, 2026, 5 days after Nancy Guthrie vanished, went on air with a source she described as credible and firsthand and said what she said. She pointed her reporting at Tommaso Cion. The sheriff pushed back. He did it publicly and with force. The family pushed back. The pressure that came down on Ashley Banfield in the days that followed was significant. The kind of professional and public pressure that causes most journalists to revisit their reporting, to issue qualifications, to soften the edges of what they said, or to distance themselves from a source that has become inconvenient. Ashley Banfield did not retract. She did not apologize. She did not soften anything. She stood on her source. She stood on her reporting. She held the line. And then on February 6, 2026, just 2 days after her report aired, the sheriff of Pima County stood in front of cameras and made a statement. He said the family had been cleared. The family cleared. 10 days passed. On February 16, 2026, that position appeared to shift. The statement that had been made on February 6th, on the clearance that had been announced publicly and with the apparent finality of an official law enforcement position, began to look less final. 10 days. The sheriff publicly cleared the family and then, 10 days later, walked that position back. What happened in those 10 days? What information came across the desks of investigators between February 6th and February 16th that was significant enough, credible enough, definitive enough to cause a complete reversal of an official public position? We do not know. The sheriff has not explained it. The FBI has not explained it. No one with a badge has stood in front of a camera and said, "This is what changed. This is what we learned. This is why what we said on February 6th is no longer what we believe on February 16th. See, and the silence around that question, a silence just as absolute in its way as the silence Tommaso Cion has maintained since the night he drove Nancy home, is its own kind of information. Silence is never neutral in a case like this. Silence is a choice. Silence is something someone decides to do instead of something else they could have done. And every decision has a reason behind it, even if that reason is never spoken out loud. So let us look at what has been spoken out loud. Let us look at the evidence that investigators have confirmed publicly, piece by piece, because in this case the confirmed evidence is extraordinary, and the gaps in what is confirmed are equally extraordinary, and the combination of those two things is precisely what makes this investigation so difficult and so important to stay close to. It is also worth pausing here to acknowledge something about the nature of confirmed evidence in an active investigation. Law enforcement does not release everything it knows. It cannot. Releasing certain details compromises the investigation, contaminates potential witnesses, or tips off the person or persons responsible in ways that allow them to adjust their behavior, destroy remaining evidence, or disappear. So the picture we have, the picture assembled from official statements, from credible journalists, from court documents, from press conferences, is necessarily incomplete. It is a partial picture, and a partial picture can be misleading, not because the pieces it contains are false, but because the pieces it is missing change the meaning of the ones it shows. Keep that in mind as we go through what is confirmed. Not as a reason to doubt the evidence, but as a reason to stay humble about the conclusions we draw from it. A masked figure entered Nancy Guthrie's home at 1:47 in the morning on February 1st, 2026. That is confirmed by what remained of the doorbell camera footage before the device was removed from the wall. The figure spent 41 minutes inside the house. That timeline is established by investigators. Every security camera inside the house was destroyed. Nancy Guthrie was removed from the premises. She was not found at the scene when investigators arrived. Her pacemaker application went dark at 2:28 in the morning, 41 minutes after the masked figure entered. Blood was found at the front doorstep. Her blood. Confirmed by DNA. Her phone, her wallet, and her medication were found inside the house, undisturbed. 2 unknown male DNA profiles were recovered from the scene, not 1, 2. A glove was recovered approximately 2 miles from the house. The DNA profile on that glove does not match any member of the Guthrie family. Federal investigators have stated publicly that they believe the same suspect may have conducted at least one visit to the property approximately 3 weeks before the disappearance. 3 weeks before February 1st, which places that surveillance visit in the second week of January 2026. Someone was watching this house weeks before Nancy was taken. Someone was learning it. Ransom demands were transmitted to media outlets following the disappearance. More than 23,000 tips have been submitted to investigators. More than 50,000 leads have been identified and pursued by law enforcement. 0 arrests have been made. At some point in the investigation, the Federal Bureau of Investigation reduced its direct operational presence in Tucson, Arizona. Whether that reduction represents a scaling down of federal involvement in the case, or whether it represents something else, a shift in strategy, a focus of resources elsewhere, or the possibility that the Bureau has already reached conclusions it has not yet shared with the public, has not been explained. Now lay all of that out flat and look at what it tells you. The doorbell camera was removed the moment the masked figure arrived, before they touched the door handle, before they set foot inside. This is not the behavior of someone who noticed a camera and reacted to it. This is the behavior of someone who knew the camera was there, had already planned to remove it, and executed that plan without hesitation. The difference between those two things is the difference between improvisation and preparation. What happened at Nancy Guthrie's front door was not improvisation. The destruction of every interior camera in the house is even more telling. Finding cameras in an unfamiliar house in the dark requires either a systematic search, moving through every room, checking every wall, every corner, every shelf, or prior knowledge of where the cameras were installed. A 41-minute window is not generous. If the figure spent significant time searching for cameras, that leaves less time for everything else that happened in that house during those 41 minutes. But if the figure already knew where the cameras were, if they had already mapped those positions before they ever set foot in the house on the night of January 31st, then finding and destroying each one becomes a matter of execution, not discovery. The DNA evidence, 2 unknown profiles at the scene, a glove 2 miles away with a third profile that does not match the family, tells us something about scale. This was not necessarily a single person. 2 unknown DNA profiles at a crime scene suggest the possibility of more than one person involved. A glove found 2 miles away, connected by DNA to neither the family nor the 2 profiles recovered from the house, adds another layer to a picture that is already significantly more complex than a single opportunistic intruder. The surveillance visit 3 weeks before the disappearance is perhaps the most chilling detail of all, because it confirms what the precision of the crime already implied. Nancy Guthrie was watched, her home was studied. The person or persons responsible for her disappearance did not choose her at random and plan this in a matter of days. 3 weeks of confirmed prior observation means at least 3 weeks of planning, likely more. It means someone made a decision, a deliberate, considered, advanced decision, to take this woman from her home and then prepared for that execution over a period of weeks. And here is what 3 weeks of surveillance on a private home actually requires. It requires patience. It requires multiple visits, or one extended observation, or access to information that reduces the number of visits needed because you already know so much about the target that the surveillance is more about confirmation than discovery. It requires a reason. You do not watch a private home in a residential neighborhood for 3 weeks without a reason, without already knowing something about the person inside it that makes watching worthwhile. And the ransom demands are a detail that complicates the picture in a significant way. Ransom is a particular kind of crime. It is not the crime of someone who wants to cause harm and disappear. It is the crime of someone who wants something specific, money in most cases, and believes they can get it while keeping the victim alive as leverage. Ransom implies that the person who sent those demands expected to receive something in return. It implies that, at least at the point when those demands were sent, the calculation was that Nancy Guthrie was worth more alive than otherwise. Whether she is still alive 30 days into this investigation is a question that no one in law enforcement has answered publicly. The medication she left on her nightstand, the pills that experts said gave her roughly 72 hours, ran out within 3 days of her disappearance. What happened after those 72 hours depends on factors we do not know. Whether she received medical care, whether she received her medication from another source, whether the people who took her understood the medical stakes of what they had done. We do not know. That level of preparation does not happen without information. Solid, specific, reliable information about a specific person in a specific house, with a specific schedule and specific habits and specific vulnerabilities. The kind of information that comes from close knowledge of a person's life. There is a journalist named Ashley Banfield who pointed her reporting in the direction of Tommaso Cian, and she has not backed down. There is a sheriff who cleared the family on February 6th and began walking that clearance back 10 days later. There is a man who drove Nancy home at 9:48 in the evening on January 31st, watched her walk through a garage, let a door come down between them, and has not said a single public word about it since. There is a country that watched a daughter and a daughter's famous sister and a son and a community of church women and thousands of strangers search and cry and beg and offer $1 million, and watch the last person to see the woman alive stay completely, absolutely, deliberately silent while all of that happened around him. And now I need you to sit with two possible explanations for that silence, because there are only two, and this case will ultimately be defined by which one is true. The first explanation is this. Tommaso Cion is a man with legal counsel. His attorney has advised him, as any competent attorney would advise a client in this position, to say nothing. To give law enforcement nothing that could be taken out of context, twisted in the media, or used against him at any future point in any future proceeding. His silence is not evidence of guilt. It is evidence of legal strategy. See, it is the constitutionally protected right of any person in this country not to speak, and it is exactly what any experienced defense attorney would demand of a client in a high-profile investigation regardless of that client's guilt or innocence. His silence means nothing except that he has a lawyer and that lawyer is doing their job. The second explanation is the one that Ashley Banfield's source pointed toward, that the silence is not strategy. That the silence is the only option available to a person who has no innocent version of events to offer. That 30 days without a statement, without 5 words, without even the most minimal public expression of concern for a missing mother-in-law, is not the behavior of an innocent man who has been told to stay quiet, that it is something else, something that investigators are looking at. Something that the shifting official positions and the reversal of the family's clearance and the continued open status of this investigation all point toward in the same direction. There is no middle ground between those two explanations. Either Tommaso Cion is an innocent man whose attorney is protecting him from a media environment that would consume anything he said and potentially compromise an investigation, or his silence is the loudest thing he has ever said. Either Ashley Banfield is a 36-year veteran of broadcast journalism who has a credible, first-hand source and is sitting on the most significant lead in this entire case, or she is pointing at an innocent man and the consequences of that will eventually need to be reckoned with. Either the sheriff cleared the family on February 6th because he had information that justified that clearance, information that the public does not have access to, or evidence so definitive that it warranted an official statement removing the family from consideration, or he cleared them because the pressure of the scrutiny became too great and it was easier to make the noise stop than to leave an open question open. And here is the thing that most coverage of this case glosses over, the thing I think is most important to say out loud. None of those possibilities are comfortable. None of them offer the clean resolution that we are trained, on by years of consuming true crime as a genre, to expect. We have been taught to expect a reveal, a moment when the pieces click into place, when the guilty party is identified and the innocent are exonerated, and the narrative closes in a way that feels satisfying, if not necessarily happy. This case has not given us that moment yet, and sitting with the absence of that moment is the hardest part of following an active investigation. It is the part that makes people want to fill the gap, with certainty they do not have, with conclusions the evidence does not yet support, with a need to resolve the discomfort of not knowing. The impulse is human and understandable, but it is also where cases go wrong. It is where investigators get locked onto the wrong theory and miss the evidence that points somewhere else. It is where innocent people get destroyed in the court of public opinion. And it is where the person who actually did something unforgivable benefits from the noise, because noise is the enemy of clarity. The job right now, for investigators, for journalists, for the 23,000 people who have called the tip line, and for everyone following this case from wherever they are, is to stay in the discomfort of not knowing without letting that discomfort push us toward conclusions we are not yet entitled to draw. And here is what makes this case unlike almost any other case this channel has covered. All of those possibilities are equally supported by the available public record. You cannot eliminate any of them. You cannot look at what has been made public and say with confidence that you know which version is true. Every theory has evidence that supports it. Every theory has evidence that complicates it. The ambiguity is not a gap in the investigation. The ambiguity is the investigation. See, it is the thing that 23,000 tips have not been able to resolve. It is the thing that 50,000 leads have circled around without landing. And an 84-year-old woman with a pacemaker and a medication she never got to take and a church she never got to return to is somewhere in or around the city where she lived for 50 years, waiting for the ambiguity to be resolved. So here is where this case stands. Here is an honest accounting of what is known and what is not, laid out in the clearest possible terms. We know that a masked individual entered Nancy Guthrie's home at 1:47 in the morning on February 1st. We know they spent 41 minutes inside. We know they destroyed every camera in the house. We know they took Nancy and left behind her phone, her wallet, and her medication. We know that her pacemaker went dark at 2:28 in the morning. We know that her blood was found at the front door. We know that 2 unknown male DNA profiles were recovered from the scene. We know that a glove found 2 miles away carries DNA that does not match the family. We know that the FBI believes the same individual may have visited the home 3 weeks before the disappearance. We know that ransom demands were sent to media outlets. We know that over 23,000 tips have been submitted and over 50,000 leads have been pursued, and not one of those tips and not one of those leads has produced an arrest. We do not know how the masked individual entered the home without forcing entry and without triggering any alarm. We do not know where Nancy is. We do not know if she is alive. We do not know whose DNA is on the glove found 2 miles away. We do not know what investigators learned between February 6th and February 16th that caused a public reversal of the family's cleared status. We do not know why Tommaso Cion has not spoken. We do not know if Ashley Banfield's source is right. We do not know if the FBI's reduced presence in Tucson means the federal investigation is winding down or means that they have already reached conclusions they have not yet shared. What I do know is this. The DNA that was recovered from that scene is in a laboratory right now. The lab is working. The analysis will come back. A name will eventually surface. It always does. And when it does, when the results come in and the pieces that have been suspended in uncertainty for 30 days finally land somewhere definitive, everything that has been said about this case, every theory, every official statement, every act of public grief and public silence is going to look completely different. Some of it will be confirmed, some of it will be destroyed, some of it will be rewritten entirely, but you will understand all of it because you were here, because you sat with the ambiguity and the difficulty and the weight of a case that does not offer easy answers and you did not look away. That is not a small thing. I want to say one more thing before we get to the call to action because I think it is important and I do not think it gets said enough in coverage of cases like this one. It is easy to follow a missing persons case from the comfort of wherever you are sitting right now and to feel like you are a spectator. Like what is happening is something you are watching rather than something you are connected to. But you are connected to it. Everyone who watches this video, everyone who calls in a tip, everyone who shares this with a friend, and everyone who sits with the details of this case and carries them to work the next morning and mentions them over lunch to someone who hadn't heard, every single one of those people is part of the ecosystem that solves cases like this. 23,000 people called the FBI tip line, 23,000 people who were sitting exactly where you are sitting right now, watching a screen, feeling what you are probably feeling. This pull toward wanting to do something, wanting the information inside their heads to be the piece that matters, wanting to be the phone call that changes everything. Most of those calls did not break the case, but some of them moved the investigation in ways we will not know about until this is over. And the one call that does break it, the one call that gives investigators the thread they need to pull the whole thing open, could come from anyone. Could come from someone who heard something at the edge of a conversation they were not supposed to overhear. Could come from someone who noticed a car parked on a street where it had no reason to be. Could come from someone who is sitting right now with a detail they have been telling themselves is probably nothing. It is probably not nothing. In cases that are solved by tips, the tip that matters almost never comes from someone who was certain they had the answer. It comes from someone who was uncertain, who hesitated, who almost didn't call, and then called anyway. Be that person. Nancy Guthrie has been gone for 30 days. She does not get to check the weather today. She does not get to feel the sun on the street outside the house she lived in for 50 years. She does not get to call her daughter on the phone. She does not get to sit in her pew on Sunday morning beside the women who organize search parties for her. She does not get to take the medication that was sitting on her nightstand waiting for a morning she never reached. She is somewhere, out there, within a few miles, most likely, of the home that holds 50 years of her life inside its walls. And someone, right now, tonight, somewhere in this country, knows where. If you have first-hand knowledge of Nancy Guthrie's whereabouts, any knowledge at all, on any detail that feels small or uncertain or incomplete, contact the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The number is 1-800-225-5324. Tips are completely anonymous. The reward in this case has grown to over $1.3 million. It can be paid in cash at a neutral location, with no identification required, no questions about your identity, no questions about how you came to have the information you have, just the information. So that is the only thing required. That is all this family needs. That is all Nancy needs. Be the person who makes that call, or share this video with someone who might be. If this case has reached you tonight, if you have watched this far and you are still sitting with it, still turning it over in your mind, then please take one more moment before you leave. Hit the like button. Not for this channel, but because every like helps this video travel further, reach more screens, land in front of more people who might have information or who might know someone who does. It is a small action that has real consequences in a case where every piece of information matters. The algorithm that determines how many people see this video does not know that this is a missing persons case. It does not weigh the importance of the content. It responds to engagement. It responds to people who watched until the end, who clicked the like button, who left a comment, who subscribed and came back for the next video. Every one of those actions tells the platform that this content is worth showing to more people, and more people means more eyes, and more eyes means more chances that someone who knows something sees this video and picks up the phone. So please, before you leave, hit like. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Tens of thousands of people are thinking about this case. What you notice, what you question, what strikes you as important, all of it matters. And this community is one of the most thoughtful places on the internet when it comes to cases like this one. Sometimes the detail that breaks a case open is a detail that investigators already have but do not yet know is significant. Sometimes it takes a different set of eyes, civilian eyes, the eyes of people who are approaching the evidence without professional preconceptions, to see the connection that trained investigators have walked past 100 times. That has happened before, it will happen again. Your eyes matter, your comments matter, your questions matter. And if you are not yet subscribed to the Untold Cold Case, subscribe right now. Not because this channel needs the number, but because this case is not over, the updates are coming, the DNA results are coming. The moment when this case cracks open is coming. And when it does, you are going to want to have been here from the beginning. You are going to want to understand what everything means in the context of what you already know. Subscribe, turn on your notifications, and be here when it happens, because it will happen. Cases like this always resolve. The question is never whether the truth will surface, the question is only when, and whether enough people cared enough to stay with it until it did. Nancy Guthrie deserves people who stay. She has been gone for 30 days, and she was 84 years old, and she had a pew waiting for her every Sunday morning, and a phone sitting on a counter she never got to pick up again, and medication sitting on a nightstand for a morning she never reached. Somewhere tonight there is a person who knows something. It might be a small thing. It might be something they saw weeks ago and filed away as ordinary because there was no reason yet to understand that it was not ordinary. It might be something they heard, a conversation, a comment, a name dropped in passing that did not mean anything then but means something now. It might be a connection they have not yet made between something they know and something they just heard in this video, a connection that would light up the moment someone helped them see it clearly. Often that person might be watching this right now, or they might be a share away, they might be in your contacts, they might be someone you will mention this case to over the weekend, in the kind of casual conversation that turns into something more when a detail lands the wrong way in someone's memory and suddenly something that was just a story becomes something they recognize. Share this video, not for the view count, for Nancy. I will see you in the next one. So, the Untold Cold Case, because every case deserves the truth.